Service, and let me switch screens here. Okay, give us just a minute to get everything switched over for you. Okay, there it is. That popped back. Okay, great. Elizabeth Jane, we all know her as EJ, is one of the Southern Area Cooperative Fire Prevention Program Managers and is now the Wildland Fire Prevention Program Manager for the U.S. Forest Service's Southern Region, and was also previously the Forest Fire Management Officer for the Daniel Boone National Forest. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Natural Resource Management with a minor in agronomy from the University of Kentucky. While working in the field of natural resources, she's worked for the Girl Scouts of the USA, the Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission, the Kentucky Division of Forestry, the Wasatch Cache National Forest, Logan Hotshots, the Daniel Boone National Forest, and the U.S. Forest Service's state, private, and tribal forestry in the southern region. So she has been all over the place working. So EJ, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Sure can.
Thank you. And you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay, I was asked to talk a little bit about the Cooperative Fire Grant Program that we have out of the U.S. Forest Service Southern Area State Private and Tribal Forestry Agency, and how the wildfire prevention will fit into those grants. So a little bit, I'll tell you just a little bit about an overview of our grant program. And I'll talk a little bit about prevention, show some statistics, and give you information about what the language in each grant narrative that guides what you apply for with grants. And I recognize that not everybody on the call is probably a grant recipient, grant administrator. You're not the grant writer, maybe. But maybe you'll pick up a few information, a little bit of information about the Forest Service in general and these programs and how you might already be participating and not even realize it. So the Forest Service, of course, you might have heard if you're in the Eastern United States, part of the Forest Service, you probably are well aware of the Weeks Act. That was in 1911, and that's the enabling legislation that created the national forests in the East. You know, the Western forests, they were just a pencil exercise that just grabbed a bunch of property and made them into the Forest Service system lands. But here in the East, we had to wait for the Weeks Act to be able to purchase lands from willing buyers at fair market value to create the national forest that we have here. Well, that same legislation was also the very first legislation that really enabled the Forest Service to start working with state partners in a meaningful way. It provided some financial and technical assistance to the states to improve wildfire protection capabilities. And the mission of the Forest Service, as you might know, is sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands for present needs of the present and future generations. And we have, you're probably very well aware of the National Forest System. That's just one branch of the Forest Service. So we also have the National Forest Systems. We have the research arm of the Forest Service. We have international forestry, and we have what's known as state, private, and tribal forestry. And as the name suggests, state, private, and tribal is the branch of the Forest Service that deals directly with state lands, private lands, tribal entities. Very little of our work is actually on the public land. So we deal directly with the states. And that's important because if we're going to really fulfill our mission, we can't do it very well on our little bit of National Forest Systems lands that we manage, because in the Southeast alone, private landowners own 86% of the forested area here in the South. And, 2/3 of that land is really owned and managed by some families and individuals. So with only 14% of the forested land, the Forest Service wouldn't do a very good job fulfilling its mission if we didn't partner with our state, private, and tribal partners. And then I've put up a couple other enabling legislations. The big one was the Cooperative Forestry Act of 1978. And that's really what brought us together and created the state Rural Fire Prevention and Control Program. Later in the 1990 Farm Bill, we changed the name to State Fire Assistance. We still use that name mostly today. And then I put on here too the Reciprocal Fire Protection Act. That was in 1955, and it's been amended a couple times. But a lot of you who work very closely with your federal partners or your federal employees who work with state partners. So that's the legislation that enabled us to enter into that Master Cooperative Fire Management and Stafford Act agreement. And so that's really what gives us the authority to really work together as partners. Now, these are all authorities. These are acts created by Congress. They're the official part of what says work together. But we all know, as Gary just pointed out, that none of us can do it alone, and it really takes all of us working together, and partnering is what helps us multiply our capacity and get more done together. So I was asked to talk about how prevention works into the grants, and really the big answer is that fire prevention should be integrated into all aspects of your fire management program. So we've talked already a couple times about the 3 E's and the A's, and while that's listed in the Forest Service National Wildfire Prevention Strategy, they really provide good direction on how to integrate into all aspects of your program. So again, education, engineering, enforcement, and administration. Those should really play into how you're building your fire program, how you're going to do some targeted actions. As you all, I'm sure, are very well. This is just a snapshot I took off the Fire Currents page, the RMA page, Risk Management Assessment page, last week, just one day. This was the number of large fire occurrences in the South on just one day last week. And as you know, the Southern area has far more fire occurrences than any other region. You look at the numbers off the annual reports from NIFC, and you'll see that number of fire starts are 10 times what other regions see. Now, we also have a lot more roads and a lot more access and a lot more people to call in the fires. So we keep them smaller, but we still have a large number of fires. And we have a large number of humans in the southeast of the United States. And therefore, the majority, 96% in the southern area, and these are 5-year statistics, but I think if you go back to 10 years or 15 years, they're going to be very similar. 96% of our fires in the South are human caused. That's staggering. I don't think people realize that. I think a lot of folks, if you've not been involved in a fire agency or forestry agency, just our general public doesn't have any idea that 96% of our fires are human caused. when you think about your fire management program, you know, there's always the pre-suppression activities that you're doing. You know, you're getting ready for the pack test, you're tuning up your chainsaws, you're getting your dozer into the shop to make sure it's ready to go. Prevention is and should be a proactive measure. That should be just, you know, it should be a continuing pre-suppression activity that's part of your program. And you've heard a couple other times this morning, cause-based focus. That's what we need to think about. You know, I used to think that I've helped teach the S591 National Fire Danger Rating System class for a long time, and I would say, yeah, but all of our fires are human caused, and boy, human behavior is so hard to model. And it's only realized recently then it dawned on me, and I started recognizing that, you know, it's really not that hard to model because Amazon, you know, Google, Facebook, even Kroger is modeling my human behavior all the time. Because how? How are they modeling that? They're using the data, and they are very data driven. And we have the technology today to use the data to help us figure out and target those human behaviors. And so this information, this data is a tool to strategically focus our efforts. Nationwide, you know, we still average 13 wildland fire fatalities a year. So the other thing that is a very huge part of every fire management program is risk management. Well, when 96% of your fires are human caused, preventing those ignitions is risk management. So when we ask, how is prevention part of our fire program? It's a pre-suppression action. It's a proactive measure. It's risk management overall. So the grants that we have through Co-op Fire, and there are, I'll go back again to the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act of '78, you know, created more than just the interaction between the fire folks. There's the whole umbrella of cooperative forestry. It encompasses quite a few programs. So forest stewardship, urban forestry, forest health, wood innovation, forest legacy. That, you know, that's all part of the umbrella of how the Forest Service State Private Tribal Forestry is working with the states. Well, on the fire side of that, we just call it Co-op Fire, and Co-op Fire oversees state fire assistance, which includes both a mitigation part and a response part. We also have the cross-boundary wildfire hazard mitigation on non-federal lands grant. I'll talk more about that later. We have the volunteer fire assistance program and community wildfire defense grants. Now, these three with the asterisk next to them also are part of those are funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. As you're well aware, we use a lot of acronyms in the federal government. And so you'll hear that as BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And that the act that enabled that law was the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So oftentimes when you're talking about these grants, you'll hear the IIJA SFA or the IIJA VFA. So that is using that bipartisan infrastructure money, those funds that came from just that new law, using the same authority that already existed to funnel some funds. And so the state fire assistance and the VFA assistance are those authorities that have been used to fund extra programs, extra projects in those programs. And then the Community Wildfire Defense Grant was a huge one, and that's nationwide. That's a new competitive grant program, good for 5 years. We're on year 4 now, that will funnel money out to different programs. I'll talk more about each of these. So the everything about these grants that you'll see on my slides, I did not make up. I am very good at copy pasting. And I took these straight from our policy, and all of our policy documents. And so oftentimes you'll see the exact language that says what are these funds to be used for. So in the Forest Service, we have our appropriations and use handbook that says what we can and can't spend the money on. And so all of the SFA, and I will also share that you'll hear a new term called state fire capacity, SFC. You'll hear people refer to that. And it's the same program as state fire assistance. Well, every now and then we decide we need to change the name of something to shift focus a little bit or to better represent what those funds are doing. And so state fire capacity is kind of the new name for state fire assistance, but they're the same program, same authorities. And so just keep that in mind as you hear that different terminology. So you'll notice that these funds, they can be used for training, planning, fuels treatments, equipment, focus on fire planning, and it's really to ensure a kind of unified approach and a unified strategy of wildland fire management. So these are also the funds that help with the Cooperative Forest Fire Prevention Program, Smoky Bear. The primary intent for a lot of these programs housed under SFA or SFC is hazard mitigation planning, critical response, initial response, and preparedness needs. And remember, when I say preparedness, prevention is part of preparedness as well. So increased initial attack capability, fire prevention, and training. And we've already heard a little bit, Marina and Cheryl talked about WIPSAPs. That's the new training opportunity available to help use some of that data on fire occurrences to have those cause-focused actions. And of course, collectively, all of these are meeting the National Cohesive Strategy goals. So SFA or SFC has two parts to it. So the mitigation part and the response part. Response, so at a national level, all the funds that get sent to us as part of state fire capacity, state fire assistance, nationally, that program is split. 65% of those funds is allocated to the response part of the program, and 35% is to mitigation. And there's a little caveat on that 35% is that now those mitigation funds must be offered in a competitive environment. So here in the South, we just fully went on competitive. Last year, we kind of introduced the competitive approach to these mitigation funds. But this year, those mitigation grants are available on grants.gov. They still have to meet the intent of cohesive strategy. They have to meet the intent of if it's an external partner applying and not a state partner, those funds, the project applications have to have the support of a state forester. Or if a tribe is applying, those tribes that, they must meet their tribal forest plan too. And within both of those programs, you can find prevention embedded in both of them, very much so. So with the mitigation grants specifically, so there's that focus on risk mitigation, fuels reduction, other mitigation activities, such as developing or implementing the community wildfire protection plans. I hope today isn't the first time you've heard CWPP, but you're going to hear more about it in a little bit. Reducing hazardous fuels in the wildland-urban interface, providing prevention and mitigation education. So educating folks about what is the risk, what are the causes, how are all these human caused ignitions getting started, and where are the problem areas? So that's a huge part of the education focus. Then promoting fire adapted communities, FireWise programming. So all of these are very valid and important projects under the SFA mitigation grant. Then under response, again, if you are using prevention to reduce ignition, then you're improving firefighter safety. And that's a big part of that part of the SFA response program. You can see firefighter training is a big part of this too. Communications, so that prevention can be part of your training. You'll hear more about all the P courses available for firefighter training. Communicating the danger, communicating the prevention messages, that can be part of response as well. So let's talk about the volunteer fire assistance grants. So this is specific money that's set aside to pass through to the states for rural volunteer fire departments in small communities. So communities of 10,000 folks or less. And that's really, as you probably know, if you live in rural South, a lot of times your VFDs are, your first, some of your first responders. Now, not all of them participate necessarily in wildland fire suppression, but a lot of times, their first line, they can get there first. They can hopefully catch something small with it. They can reach it from their hose, from their truck. But these funds are to help the VFDs with some training, with some equipment, so they're prepared to build capacity in the wildland fire world as well. And part of VFA says, and again, I didn't make up any of the language on these slides. Every piece of the language that is on these slides came from some part of our policy telling us how to implement these programs. So fire prevention activities can be conducted by your rural volunteer fire departments because you can use them to help inform the communities they serve on what are their problem areas, how to prevent ignitions, and how to safeguard their properties. The other grant that we administer through Co-op Fire is the cross-boundary wildfire mitigation on non-federal lands. Quite the mouthful. Here, most recently, we called that same exact grant program, the Community Fire Protection Grant, but it originally was the Stevens Grant. And that's because back, gosh, I can't remember exactly when, but the grant was originally proposed by Senator Ted Stevens from Alaska. So in Alaska, there was escaped prescribed fire from the Forest Service, and he had the recognition that fuels reduction doesn't just need to happen on federal lands. How are we going to protect our private lands, particularly when there are potential for some escapes from Forest Service fuel reduction activities? And so money was set aside at that point to provide money, hazardous fuels funding that the Congress allocates to the Forest Service. A portion of those funds were funneled into state, private, and tribal forestry to go to the states to do some of the similar work on non-federal lands. Now, those funds need to somehow show a tie to benefit the similar activities on federal lands. So in the South, we kind of just generally say within 10 miles, but really the intent of the program is to use these funds on non-federal lands adjacent or close to federal lands to enhance the already ongoing programs of fuels reduction, some hazard mitigation activities, enhance those programs on the federal lands. So in 2023, and for the last couple of years, the Washington office has funneled $20 million of our national forest hazardous fuels funding to go to the states. And then this region, we only get a little over 3 million of that. So it's spread across the country. So, some of the other things you can see, like in addition to fuels reduction, whether it be through prescribed burning or mechanical, it can also be for CWPPs, technical assistance to landowners, or training or monitoring of different hazardous fuels management activities. And then we have the real recent and brand new program last year called Community Wildfire Defense Grant. So that was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that gave 5 years worth of considerable amounts of funding to go out for national competition for these funds. The folks who could apply are states, tribes, county governments, local municipalities, homeowners association, NGOs, RC&Ds, any of these nonprofit entities that have a need for wildfire preparedness, to wildfire mitigation activities, could apply to these funds. Now they're specifically for two things. So it's either to develop or revise an older community wildfire protection plan, CWPP, or to implement the projects that your CWPP said you needed to do to be a safer community. So those are funds that are available. That program prioritizes areas that are in very high risk from wildfire, also prioritizes low income areas and underserved communities, and areas that have been adversely affected by natural disasters that increase their risk to wildfire. So you've heard CWPPs a couple of times now. So we might have a poll for this. What are you familiar with CWPPs? How many of you have been involved with CWPPs? Just a question. Okay, let's see, yes or no? Have you been involved in the development or implementation? Okay, we're about 60-40, 66-33. Oh, yeah. Okay. So you can see that, about a little over half, a little more than half of you have been involved somewhat. So that's good. This isn't a new thing for you. How does prevention fit into your CWPP? So if all these grants, every grant we have basically talks about CWPPs, how in the world is prevention fitting into those? And so if you don't know, if you're part of that 33% that really hasn't been involved with CWPP, it's basically a collaborative plan within a community, and community can be defined as your local road, your HOA, your county, however your group decides to focus their attentions. A collaborative approach where you analyze your issues, where you're at risk, what the risks are, and what can you do about it. So that's basically what it is. If we think about our CWPPs, again, using the 3s and the A, what are some things in your CWPP that are prevention related? So let's think about education. And what do you think? Think about that. Those of you who have been involved in education, what are some prevention things that relate to education that you would write into your CWPP or incorporate? So think about educating your community. So a big part, before you sit down, you have this collaborative group. A lot of those people may not have any idea that they're even at risk. They probably don't even recognize why. If they know they're at risk, they don't know why. So educating the community about fire behavior, what is it about fire or this where we live in this community that makes us at risk? Fuels, weather, topography. Educate the public on the fire occurrences in that area. Provide the data. Look at the data that says, here's the kinds of fires we have, and here's how they're getting started. explain the seasonality of fire danger, particularly in the South. So, unfortunately, a lot of wildfires get the biggest press during the summer when we're all lush green and we're dripping with 90% humidity here in the South, but California is raging, and so it's all over the news. People don't recognize when our seasonal fire dangers are. So those are some education things that should be the very first part of a CWPP development. Okay, engineering. What in your CWPP falls into the engineering category? So when you're looking at your community, you're going to do your home ignition zone assessment, or you're going to give some recommendations to the people in that community or moving into that community. So you want to talk to them about screening for their eaves and vents to prevent those sparks from entering the homes. Spark arresters for equipment, chimney caps, campfire rings. How are the utility lines coming in? Did you, how are you engineering the landscaping around your house? Do you have a lot of people who decided they wanted to mask their ugly propane tank by planting nice, great Chinese silvergrass all around it? So what about engineering and preventing those ignitions is going to be part of your community wildfire protection plan? How about enforcement? What about enforcement needs to be written into your CWPP? Well, is your community, do you have any restrictions within that community? Are you going to implement, if it's a smaller one, are you going to implement the neighborhood watch program of some sort, or enforce, enforce any of the county or state restrictions there? Are there consequences that need to be addressed for in that community on any of the restrictions that are local, state, county and restrictions or burn guidance? And then administration. So think again, remember, what kind of training are you going to recommend for the people in your community? So in your CWPP, as you're developing it, is there training that they need to have? What are you going to communicate? How is the fire danger going to be communicated within that county? How are the people going to find out? What are the resources where they can find out what the fire danger situation is or the current situation? Are you going to plan for fire prevention activities so that once you finish your plan and you stick your CWPP on the shelf, that's it? Or are you going to actually make some recurrent plans for reminders and some prevention activities? Coming up Saturday is Community Wildfire Mitigation Day, this coming Saturday. So does your community have something on the calendar to do for that? Have you incorporated that into your plan? Does your plan plan for new homeowners coming into your area, into the community, and how are they going to be brought into the fold of your CWPP, and how are you going to teach them about wildfire and what prevention measures and activities they need and what they can be involved with? Okay. So if somebody else is monitoring the chat, does anybody have any other ideas of how your CWPP can incorporate any of these 4 prevention items?
EJ, it looks like Gwen has said some special safety days, wildfire prevention days, have been supported by CWPP. So that's another good thing. And I know we've done that in Tennessee.
Absolutely. Any other ideas? I know said like 65% of you have been involved in CWPPs. Surely you've got some good ideas from your past involvement.
Wesley had put a comment in on how structures burn, identifying long-held assumptions.
Yeah. Are the assumptions that, you talk to your community folks and, they're still under the assumption that lightning is the biggest problem that we have.
EJ, one question Gwen had with VFAs when it says safeguard their properties, aren't they usually referring to preventing ignitions of structures?
All right, I've got a quiz for you. If you want to go, you can scan this in with your phone. There's 2 questions. Just hopefully everybody passes. Okay. Got more and more. I see answers coming up. Right. So let me see if I can share this. Yeah, here we go. Yep, and I made them pretty easy. It was a good quiz. Gary mentioned it as well. I'm a huge Smokey fan. If I were at my home office, you would see Smokey posters, Smokey calendar. Often you'll find me in Smokey Bear socks. All the nieces, nephews, grandkids are fully outfitted in Smokey wear. I am a huge fan of Smokey, but I want to start reminding folks, a lot of times you talk about prevention programs, and that's where their minds go, oh, well, I'm going to do a prevention program. So it's a Smokey Bear program at the kindergarten or a 5th grade class. The prevention program is so much more than just doing Smokey programs. Smokey programs, I think, are important. I really appreciated some of the ideas that Gary shared out there. Maybe Smokey, we need to start taking him to the Rotary Club and the Lions Club and Kiwanis rather than to the kindergartens, and really start educating our adults as well as some of our youth. But yes, Smokey is a huge part of prevention programming. Definitely put Smokey programs in your grants, but I hope that you can see that there's much more to your grant program than just, mentioning taking Smokey. Now let's see the next question. Yeah. Prevention can be part of the Forest Service Co-op fire grant activities. So that is true. It can be a part. Every one of our grant programs mentions prevention, as you might have noticed. I said, like, I didn't make up the language on those slides. I copy pasted it straight out of our policy and guidance documents. So yes, very true. Prevention can be, and really should be, because it's integrated into your larger fire management program, should be part of your grant activities that you're doing. Right. I know, like I said, I know not everybody is a grant writer or a grant deals with the grants directly that they get from the Forest Service, but I would guess that probably a lot of you contribute to the activities that are part of these grants you're getting funding for. Got a couple minutes here for questions.
Anna Thompson, go ahead.
All right, let's see.
Hannah Thompson, go ahead.
Michael Downey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question. We get quite a bit of hazard mitigation done, and I understand the goal of it all.
Wait a minute, sorry.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Now I can, yeah, sorry, I had
Okay.
mine muted.
So I've been looking at a lot of hazard mitigation around here in Virginia, and I understand the ultimate goal for the mitigation. But I feel and have observed that the biggest obstacle is road maintenance, ingress and egress, and access into these communities. And I know the program doesn't support road maintenance, but is there any conversation or discussion going on and maybe adding that like a one time for gravel or something like that to kind of, I don't know how to say it, but yeah.
So a lot of those fire hardening tasks right now are falling into the FEMA grants that are available. And we're trying to really work together with FEMA so that we're not duplicating efforts and duplicating grant activities. And I see Maureen is still on if she has any other information, but at this time, I personally don't foresee that happening because I do know that fire hardening kind of falls under the guidance of the FEMA program.
Understand. Thank you.
Yeah, but you're right that recognizing that limited access and egress is an issue. Well, that's step one, and trying to figure out how to do something about it.
Right. Yeah, I understand it's more that doesn't really fall under prevention and mitigation, but it comes to the point where if there is a fire in these areas, in these communities, well, we've done the mitigation work, but there's still the access to get fire apparatus in there, and we're widening roads, but I feel like there's still the potholes and things like that that we still need to go around.
Yeah. Now, some of the things you can think about. I know I've been around some of the communities that's super high risk. And they've got a lot of fuels right up along the edge of the roads. And so like fuels reduction programs along the edge to kind of help reduce fuel loading along the edge of the roads. That's one thing that I've seen be funded, but not actually like gravel. Go ahead, Pete.
Oh, EJ caught me with my mouth full. Didn't think I was going to get in. Hey, I wonder, this may be a loaded question, but I think there's a perception that the Forest Service wildfire crisis response is sending all the money to these 21 high priority fire sheds out west. And so it's been good to hear your talk about money coming through the recent legislation that is helping other areas. So I just wonder if you could speak to that real briefly.
Yeah, and I know that on a real regular reoccurring basis, like our normal grant activity, the SFA normal response, SFA mitigation, cross boundary, aka Stevens, and the VFA, those normal grants that are a yearly thing with the states, we get about $25 million across those program areas, those grant programs, to funnel to the state private and tribal partners. And I apologize, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head for what the BIL funded that were the extra SFA response money and the extra VFA money that came out each year for the next little bit. But it was quite a bit of additional funding that to help us address the wildfire crisis. And then Community Wildfire Defense Grants is the huge one. And of course, that's nationwide, highly competitive, as we found out. We had 14 projects, 14 applications funded here in the South, but that only ended up equating to about $1.8 million. Not, 1.8 million is a lot of money, but it's not compared to what did go out west. But that was highly competitive. We did get things going. A lot of our communities here, our CWPPs really need some work. So that's what we're hoping, that we can get some of our CWPPs updated and really focused on what needs to be done to reduce risk and to mitigate risk for those communities. And then if we are successful getting those CWPPs together, hopefully some of our project applications can be successful going forward.
Good stuff. Thanks, EJ.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Hannah, did you still have a question?
And on Facebook was showing
Didn't quite catch that. So,
Yeah, Hannah, maybe you can type it into the chat. You were breaking up.
hey. All right. I think I am eating into your lunchtime. So Robin, do you want me to hand it back over to you?
Okay, thanks, EJ. And definitely monitor the